So this is constructed very much like it. This is the 3 feet I'm talking about. So it's 1.5 type.
I could call a lot of room.
And this is where it was. Where the two is in this bed we set up and like the picture shows. These are all I prepared. And because they're waiting downstairs and we know the story,
No flash, we don't need it.
of Mormon publication site, giving these tours. I love it. I'm going to explain the printing press room a little bit. They would take a page of the manuscript like this, and one of these called a composing stick, over to the cases. And you can see uppercase, lowercase. And they would fill the composing stick up letter by letter, upside down and backwards, so that it would print correctly. And once it was full, they would release the letters into this little box called a chase. And then they would make a proof sheet of that. This represents one page. They would correct any errors, and then put it inside this larger box, also called a chase. And this box holds 16 pages of the Book of Mormon. Once it was full, they would carry it over here to the press. And this is called a Smith press, also known as an acorn press, because you can see the shape on the outside. It looks like an acorn. And there were only 2 of these presses in the state of New York at that time. So I was fortunate that one was here in the E.B. Grandin printing building. Then they would take some ink, mash it down, look like black gelatin, put it on the inking balls, and distribute it evenly over the type. And then they take a piece of paper, put it on, reel it under, and make a copy. And they would go ahead and do that 5,000 times for the whole set of Book of Mormons they were making, so that they wouldn't have to reset the type for those 16 pages. And so, but once they were done, the floor in here and this middle part of the wall is original. Over here, there's ink everywhere. You can see it's splattered. Over here is where they would clean off the type using this lye solution. And this process took 7 months to complete all 5,000 Book of Mormons. So it was quite a process. Print shop on a block and tackle. It's like a pulley system, and they would look like this. There were 16 on front and 16 on back. Then they would cut them in half, right in the middle. And then they have people working on folding. They had to fold it just right so that it would look like this. And then they put their signature along one of the edges. And so this became known as a signature. They put their signatures on so they could get paid for their folding work. So this is one signature, and there were 37 signatures in the Book of Mormon. Once they had all 37, they would keep them mashed down, then make 4 cuts along the spine of the book here. And then they would sew between each of those cuts. They would sew up each signature. And then they would take some hot glue along the spine, so that all 37 signatures would stick together. But then you still can't read it because it's folded. So they made 3 cuts, one along the top, one along the bottom, one along the outside edge so it would be smooth. So there was a razor blade in here, and they made 3 cuts. And then we talked about how the Book of Mormon was covered in leather. They would cover it in leather, so it would look like this. Put a piece of paper on top, so it looked nice. And then there's one last step. What do you think? Last step. Identification. They would lay a thin piece of gold leafing along the spine of the book, cut out a little piece of leather, and then one of these instruments heating over the coals would read Book of Mormon. So they would stamp on top Book of Mormon, and the gold would shine through. Then they would take one of these tools and make horizontal lines along the spine to make it look nice. This process took 2 years, so it was a little over 2 years to do all 5,000 for the printing and binding.
Yeah, there hasn't been much development. It's pretty much the same as it did 100 years ago.
I think they had to go in the church there and then they let them know.
Well, this is where the church was organized. This was the bedroom. And that bed when the three witnesses were shown the plates and Joseph had the burden lifted of being the sole witness. And he came in and fell on the bed there and just imagine what a load that would be off your shoulders. That would have been where the final translation took place.
This here?
Yes, in here.
This is where the final translation took place.
Apparently Oliver and John Whitmer and Emma were involved in helping the last final translation. To me, it's quite a couple of experiences. A couple days ago when we visited the center, we got all different look along the different maybe. And then again, on the mission with the stand.
This is inside the Newell K. Whitney home, and Joseph Smith actually lived here for about a month. Sections 41 and 42 and 72 are received here. Over here on the right is a bedroom where Joseph stayed.
2 weeks ago, I made one meal because of the temple riders. Have you seen the temple riders? They are motorcycles, like traveling. Oh, okay. And they can hear. They also can hear.
This is the recently restored Newell K. Whitney home. This is exactly where his home was. He lived here, had this built, and had his store, the Newell K. Whitney store, built about the same time, and that's his store right over there, where the prophet Joseph and Emma also lived, upstairs.
You got another group coming. They'll be on you in about 10 minutes, no later.
Just tell them, just say we have so many
Who is this group right here? Okay, that's
They want truth. They want truth. Just say that.
But also this is important because you know that after the arrival,
Inside the store, this is the trading room. I just have to get this really quick. I'm not taking it anymore.
okay.
This is a room where they used this when the Bishop's storehouse was first started. They'd bring their goods here, and this is where they'd keep them to help the poor of the church. The kitchen, the back of the Newell K. Whitney store. Now we're going upstairs. This is the bedroom where Joseph and Emma lived, upstairs in the Newell K. Whitney store. This is the room where Joseph Smith III was born. Down on the floor, this is the original floor, and I don't know if you can see it, but it was painted red, and some of the red paint is still here on the floor.
We're going to stay here. How do you think that these people...
This is the Revelation room upstairs in the Whitney store. That's the original table. This is where 17 sections of the Doctrine and Covenants were received. Also here is where Joseph and Sidney Rigdon and Frederick G. Williams were praying to know about how to build the Kirtland Temple. And they saw a vision of the temple and drew plans for the temple right here. This is the room upstairs in the Newell K. Whitney store where they held the School of the Prophets. It's a very sacred room. This is where the men met to discuss the nature of God and to learn, and it's also the place where they had the first MTC of sorts. Men were trained here before they would go out and serve missions. This is the room where they would, as they met, smoke and chew tobacco, and Emma had to clean the floor, and this is the reason that Section 89 was received on the Word of Wisdom. This is the John Johnson Inn, just newly built, barely finished. And we're going inside in just a minute. This is the site of the first brick home built in Kirtland. It was built by Peter French. The church later purchased it. It was used as an inn. It was also used as a place upstairs where they did some printing. They had the printing office there until the printing office was built next to the Kirtland Temple. Now, since it's been rebuilt by the church, it's used as a place for exhibits. Just beautifully done inside and lots of neat things to learn. Here is the Newell K. Whitney store, and this is where, as Newell and his wife had been faithful followers of Christ, they'd been praying earnestly for help from the Lord. Right here in front of the store, Joseph had pulled up in a sleigh that had been lent to him. He and Emma arrived here. Emma was about 6 months pregnant. Joseph had, as he was praying, seen Newell Whitney praying in a vision. Joseph pulled up here on the sleigh, walked into the store, extended his hand, and said, "Newell K. Whitney, thou art the man." Newell was surprised that he'd known his name and told Joseph so, and he said, "You have the advantage of me. I can't call you by name." Joseph said, "I'm Joseph Smith, the prophet. You've prayed me here. Now what do you want of me?" From there, Newell was so pleased and moved that the Lord would send the prophet here to teach him as he'd been praying for guidance and direction. Over here across the street in the Newell K. Whitney home that's been restored, one of the sister missionaries just told us this story through this home, that Newell and his wife, of course being honest seekers after Christ and of truth, had been praying earnestly to know what was true and what was right, and she said that a cloud appeared over their home, and they were guided, and they heard a voice that said that the word of the Lord would come to them soon. And then all these subsequent events happened, and they of course accepted the church full-heartedly, embraced it, and came in and were great instruments in building the kingdom in this dispensation.
Go ahead. Oh, just trying to do going here. That'd be good. Okay. And I'll film it. We'll give it a start. Oh, we are. I'm gonna take care of you. So what happened? He has to take care of my son.
Right close to that blue spruce there, we believe, was where a little schoolhouse was here on the Isaac Morley farm. It's private property now. There's a home built up there, but Isaac Morley previously had 260 acres here. The church owns about 20 acres now, and right along here there were a lot of sacred spiritual experiences that happened here. The fourth general conference of the church was held here, and at one point, as Joseph had met with a bunch of men there and asked them to bear their testimonies about the work, he told them that they knew no more concerning the work of the Lord than a babe on his mother's lap, that this church would fill North and South America and the whole world. Wilford Woodruff was here and was, as Joseph had said, surprised about that, and lived, of course, to go west and become the president of the church. And as the Salt Lake Temple was built, he testified that Joseph had said at that time here in this little schoolhouse that they would go to the Rocky Mountains and build a temple to the Lord. And Wilford bore testimony that he was there and had seen it happen. Right down from this property, shortly here, is the property the church has bought. But this part of this is the old Chillicothe Road, where the saints, when they gathered to Ohio, came here. They would have come on the Erie Canal to the Fairport Harbor, and then this road right along here that I'll show you in a minute is lined at this point by some bricks you can see there. These would have most likely been for a retaining wall to keep the water off the road, is what we're told. But right down here is the old Chillicothe Road where the saints would have come off the Fairport Harbor and walked the rest of the way. I believe it was about 12 miles down into Kirtland as the saints gathered together at Kirtland.
There's a little cubbyhole you can look inside and see the walls. Look to your right. And you can see the walls. And imagine there being 2 feet thick.
2 feet thick?
2 feet thick.
This does look like St. George.
I have the vaulted ceilings, and it's in the middle and on the side, and pulpits, and
It's very similar.
now, one of the sort of, this is off kind of structurally, and you bought some books that you can look at, those structural, and that's very interesting, that looks really good. And they never really used them up here. They intended to, I'm sure, but they never did. Because after the dedication, that was in the spring of '36, they were, the bulk of them then left in that summer of '38 and then '39. So they really only used this building a lot for about 2 years. For such a big building. That seems like a lot of work, but still going on. Any other questions? In the corner, there are some pictures. You can ignore those. Those are upstairs, and that's
And then she wanted it big, so we're like, big house, and look at that color. Look at that.
the John Johnson home. These bricks and mantle and crane and a lot of other things in this home are original. Elsa Johnson wanted windows, color, and a large home, and she got all three of them. Probably the most prominent wealthy family in all of Hiram. This is in the John Johnson home. Was previously the parlor. Eventually, when John invited Joseph and Emma to live here, this became Joseph and Emma's bedroom. They know that this was the color and the pattern on the floor. When they got the home to restore it, they sanded down a little bit and found a section of the floor with the original color and pattern on it. All the nicest things here. This is the room that Joseph was staying in the night the mobbers came in, grabbed him, took him outside and tarred and feathered him and beat him. The room where little Joseph Murdoch caught cold and eventually died. This is upstairs in the John Johnson home. Originally this was John and Elsa Johnson's bedroom. When Joseph moved here, they gave this bedroom up to be the prophet's study. It became the headquarters of the church. This is the room in which the Father and the Son appeared, and Joseph and Sidney Rigdon saw a vision of 3 degrees of glory. Incredible room. Front doorstep of the John Johnson home. Right inside this front door and to the left is the Joseph and Emma's bedroom, where John and Elsa let Joseph stay. This is where the mob entered John Johnson's home, grabbed Joseph Smith from the bedroom, took him outside, a bunch of them holding him so that he wouldn't touch the ground and get a hold of him, dragged him along here down the road a ways and beat him up. Tried to force a vial of poison into his mouth and chipped his tooth and tarred and feathered him. As they did that, they left the door open to the front door, and their little boy, Joseph Murdoch Smith, caught cold from that and died 5 days later. Joseph Smith spent the night cleaning the tar off of himself and the feathers, and other friends helping him. The next morning he came out. This is where he used to preach his sermons when he lived here, on the front doorstep and the congregation out here. He came out and preached a sermon the next morning. 3 of the mob members that had just tarred and feathered him the night before were in the congregation. After Joseph finished preaching, 3 people were baptized that day.
Joseph!
The bus is coming, so let's hurry.
You're gonna tell us about that cat.
Is there anyone else in there? Okay. On the door, where they cut.
These are the stairs right when you enter Carthage jail that go up to the room where Joseph and Hiram and John Taylor and Willard Richards were imprisoned. Carthage Grays, the mob, entered and went up these stairs. Joseph and Hiram and John and Willard were barring the door to try and stop them. They fired a bullet that broke the lock and a bullet through the door that hit Hiram and killed him. Joseph fell out the window as he was shot, first from outside in his chest and then from behind in his back. Right up straight ahead, at the end of the stairs, is the dungeon where they stayed for about an hour and a half. Also the room where Willard Richards took John Taylor after he'd been shot and after Joseph had been killed to keep him safe. Smith Family Cemetery is the final resting place of Joseph Smith, his wife Emma, and brother Hiram, Lucy Mack and Joseph Smith Sr., and many other family members and friends. After Joseph Smith and Hiram were assassinated at the Carthage jail on June 27, 1844, their bodies were returned to Nauvoo, where they laid in state in the dining room of the mansion house. Fearing for the safety of the bodies, the coffins were emptied and buried in a tomb near the temple, while the bodies were secretly buried between the foundation walls of the Nauvoo house. When construction of the Nauvoo house resumed in 1845, they were secretly reburied under a small building, now reconstructed southwest of the homestead. In 1928, Frederick Madison Smith, president and prophet of the church from 1915 to 1946, and grandson of Joseph Smith Jr., hired Kansas City, Missouri surveyor W.O. Hands to locate the unmarked graves of Joseph and Hiram. Once located, they were moved a few feet north and reburied for the final time. This is the red brick store. On the main floor was a store. Joseph Smith owned and operated this. Upstairs was his office, and the room right there that we're looking at upstairs is the room where the Relief Society was first organized. This is also where the first endowments were done before the temple was completed. In the back of the store was an office for Newell K. Whitney where he could receive payments and bills and people's tithing. I'm here in Gallatin, Missouri, July 29th, 2002. In this very place, just up the road, is the city center of Gallatin. In 1838, it was also an election year. This year, running for the state legislator, a man by the name of William Peniston was in town, and he was against the Mormons. An anti-Mormon, William Peniston, didn't want the Mormons to vote. They were all in favor of his oppressor, his opposition, John Williams. In this town, right up the road at the time, were only 10 houses, 3 of which were saloons. The Mormons were instructed if they were going to vote that they ought to take arms. The morning of the vote, August 6th, Monday, 1838, some Mormon men went to Gallatin to vote unarmed. Well, William Peniston would try to stop this at all costs. He gave a rousing speech calling the Mormons liars, thieves, claiming they could cast out devils and heal the sick. Some of the men who were anti-Mormon as well, full of whiskey, decided to start a fight. They knocked a man by the name of Dick Welding, a mob bully, punched one of the Mormons, knocking him to the ground, and a fight ensued that morning. A Mormon man by the name of John Butler grabbed an oak stake from a wood pile and began knocking the Missouri mobsters all to the ground, which with strength that even amazed him. Word got back to Joseph Smith that in this fight 2 of his members of the church had been killed. Joseph went to see.
None of them had been killed, but of course, rumors got back and false stories that the Mormons wanted to fight and were causing trouble. And this started what ended up causing the Mormons to be driven from the state of Missouri. This is Doug Dahl reporting live, Gallatin, Missouri.
As you can see, the jail was definitely a very humbling place. The prisoners were kept in the dungeon area down below, and the guards stayed up in the top. There is no source of heat in this building, and also if you'll notice on the door on the inside, there's no handle. This is because the guards were locked inside with the prisoners until their shift was over and someone came to let them out. These circumstances would have been very difficult, even to be a guard on duty at this time. It was a great test of the character and of the faith of these men as they were held here. Now the second narration that we'll listen to is taken from the journal of a man who actually watched the prisoners arrive at the jail. And to listen to this narration, I'd like to have you follow me and we'll go around to the front of the building.
Joseph Smith and 5 other prisoners, Sidney Rigdon, Hiram Smith, Myron White, Caleb Baldwin, and Alexander McRae, were brought to the Liberty Jail on December 1st, 1838. An eyewitness recorded.
They were all in one large, heavy wagon with a high box. The inhabitants of Liberty and many of the surrounding country were out to witness the entrance of the prisoners into the place. And many expressed their disappointment that the strangers should so resemble all other men. The prisoners left the wagon and immediately ascended the south steps to the platform. One by one, the prisoners entered. Joseph Smith was the last. He turned partly around and lifting his hat said in a distinct voice,
"Good afternoon, gentlemen."
The next moment he passed out of sight.
This narration is one of my favorites.
The next 4.5 months were miserable in the jail. It was cold and damp. The men spent most of their time crouched in the dungeon because the ceiling was too low to stand erect. They rested on dirty piles of straw spread on the jagged rock floor. The food was coarse and filthy. They were allowed few visitors. Joseph wrote to his family and friends,
Those who have not been enclosed in the walls of a prison without cause can have but little idea how sweet the voice of a friend is. One token of friendship from any source whatever awakens every sympathetic feeling.
But more distressing to the prisoners than their physical circumstances were the meager details they received concerning the hardships being faced by members of the church.
Forsake your religion. Abandon your prophet. If you do not, you need not expect redress, for there is none.
It is impossible for my pen to tell you of our situation. 5,000 men, women, and children driven from their homes in poverty.
We ask for the privileges guaranteed all free citizens to live and worship God according to our own conscience.
No one but God knows the feelings of my heart when I left our home and almost all of everything that we possessed, excepting our little children, and took my journey out of the state.
Liberty Jail was a place of painful refining for Joseph Smith and his companions. As he tried to pen words of consolation to the suffering saints, Joseph poured out his anguish in prayer.
O God, where art thou? And where is the pavilion that covereth thy hiding place? how long shall thy hand be stayed, and thine eye behold from the heavens the wrongs of thy people?
In this cramped, confining prison cell, Joseph received answer to his prayers. Through revelation, he was given teachings as lofty as the heavens.
My son, peace be unto thy soul. Thine adversity and thine afflictions shall be but a small moment, and then, if thou endure it well, God shall exalt thee on high. If thou art called to pass through tribulation, if the heavens gather blackness, and all the elements combine to edge of the way, know thou, my son, that all these things shall give thee experience, and shall be for thy good. The Son of Man hath descended below them all. Art thou greater than he?
Other important truths were also revealed in the Liberty Jail.
Behold, there are many called, but few are chosen. And why are they not chosen? Because their hearts are set so much upon the things of this world. Fear not what man can do, for God shall be with you forever and ever. Let virtue garnish thy thoughts unceasingly. Then shall thy confidence wax strong in the presence of God. The Holy Ghost shall be thy constant companion, and thy scepter an unchanging scepter of righteousness and truth.
The words of comfort and perspective revealed in Liberty Jail sustained Joseph Smith and the members of the church through this trial and many others which followed. What could have been a time of despair became a season of faith. The members of the church found temporary refuge in the state of Illinois. In April 1839, a change of venue was ordered for the prisoners. Realizing that there was no valid charge against them, the sheriff, directed by his superiors, allowed them to escape. They soon joined their friends and family in Illinois. Today, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints remember the Liberty Jail not as a place of suffering, but as a sacred spot where faith was tested and found sufficient. A place where the voice of God was heard again as he spoke to a living prophet. A place where revelation was given for all mankind.
This is historic Liberty Jail. This was torn down and reconstructed, but we know that a few things about it are still original. When we get to the other side, the floor in the dungeon is original. Later, after this was abandoned, a man bought it and built his home upon the foundation. So the original floor, the cement floor in the dungeon is original. On this door here, where the men would have entered, the hinges on this door are original. And they said that a few other pieces of hardware are also original. This would have been the door where the 6 men would have entered: Joseph, Hiram, Sidney Rigdon, Lyman White, Caleb Baldwin, and Alexander McCrae. Once inside the door, they would have gone down right there in that hole you can see in the floor down into the cellar, and then that would have been covered up. This is a window with bars in it from the outside to the inside of Liberty Jail. Originally there were 6 prisoners. Ended up being 5, Sidney Rigdon. This was after he had been dragged from his home and had his head lacerated and banged up and swelled up. He pleaded his case and had some mental problems, and they allowed Sidney Rigdon to be set free. But this would have been, through this window, the only really source of light they would have had down in the basement dungeon. The walls here, as were described, got stone, and then some loose stone, and then some big wood beams, making them about 4 feet thick. There is the original floor, and I think we know what that bucket was used for. It's where Joseph received sections 121, 122, and 123. While here in prison, the saints received much persecution, were driven from the state, and had to leave Missouri and cross into Illinois. The ceiling of where they stayed was about 6 feet, and all of them were around 6 feet or a little bit over, so they couldn't even stand up straight here. Up on top, the very top level, they put rocks on top of the beams to make escape impossible through the ceiling. This is far west. In 1836, when things were pretty bad in Clay County and the Mormons were asked to leave, a friend of the saints, Alexander Doniphan, took a bill to the state legislature to see if they could designate 2 new counties in Ray County in northern Missouri for specifically the Mormons to dwell in. This was approved, and the counties of Davies and Caldwell were designated as places the Mormons could go and live. A lot of significant things happened here. They were told to build a temple here. And over here, what we're approaching is the temple site, and we'll go see the cornerstones that were laid here. Unfortunately, they didn't live in Far West very long. They were told in section 115 to start building the temple July 4th, 1839, and of course by then they had to leave, and they were on their way to Nauvoo, being kicked out of the state of Missouri. Here's the temple site, and I just tripped, and let's go see the cornerstones. This cornerstone was laid in representation of the High Council, Quorum of the 12. Here's the stone, encased in a glass box. As we go up here further, hi. We'll read this before we go on. Caldwell County in 1836 was a wilderness. By the spring of 1838, the population was more than 5,000, of which more than 4,900 were Latter-day Saints, with the greater concentration at Far West, which by this time had 150 houses, 4 dry goods stores, 3 family groceries, half a dozen blacksmith shops, a printing establishment, and 2 hotels. A large and comfortable schoolhouse had been built in 1836 and served also as a church and courthouse. Alright, let's go up to this other cornerstone up here. This cornerstone was laid in representation of the lesser priesthood. And as we go over here, oh, well, we'll read this and we'll go back. There's another cornerstone. It says, this cornerstone was laid in representation of the first presidency. Now, I said a lot of important things happened here in Far West. There's a memorial here that talks about some of those things. One of them was, here in Far West, the official name of the church was revealed. Before this, they had called the Church of Christ, or the Church of the Latter-day Saints, and sometimes the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints. But Far West is the official place where the name of the church in its entirety was revealed. Also, the law of tithing was revealed here, section 119. The 12 apostles were called to leave from Far West, April 26, 1839. Mobs had pressured the saints and their lives were in danger, and it looked like they weren't going to get to leave, but about midnight, April 26th, the 12 came here under moonlight, and as the prophecy was given them, they departed from this very spot, the temple site, to leave for their mission in Great Britain. It was dedicated as a holy land and a place where they'd build their temple. So, let's go get this last cornerstone. Before we get this, there's one more plaque over here. Something else that happened here. Let's see if we can read it. Short distance to the west of this site, Joseph F. Smith, the son of Hiram and Mary Smith, was born on November 13th, 1838. He became the 6th president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And here is the last cornerstone. It says, this cornerstone was laid in representation of the high priesthood. One other thing that took place at Far West was Hiram Smith was called to take Frederick G. Williams' place as second counselor in the first presidency of the church here. So, in not a very long period of time, Far West became a great city of about 5,000 people, and unfortunately they didn't get to stay here very long, as Joseph and the other 5 were imprisoned in Liberty Jail. Saints had to leave here on their own without a prophet to lead them, go across the Mississippi to Illinois, where the citizens of Quincy took them in and helped them until Joseph could get there and build up Nauvoo. This is a plaque just across the street from the temple site west, and talks about Joseph Smith's home stood about 150 yards southwest of here, which is right over there. So About a football field and a half from here is where Joseph Smith's home would have been in Far West. Here's the lot over where Brother Jensen is standing is the southwest cornerstone. Right now, that right there is the Church of Christ building. Across the street this way is the Community of Christ Temple, formerly the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Across the street that way is our visitor center, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and directly across the temple lot this way is the conference center, the Community of Christ Church. Independence, Missouri is the headquarters of the former Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Second, we got to get.
I'm Elder William Sheldon of the Council of Apostles of this church. Glad to welcome you here. I'd like to talk to you about some things that distinguish us from other churches of Latter-day Saint faith.
And tell us the name of your church, the official name of your church.
The official name is Church of Christ. We've accepted the original name as it was on April 6, 1830. It went by that name for 4 years, when a conference action at Kirtland, Ohio, changed it to the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Leaving out the name of Christ entirely, this group objected. Still later, in 1838, the name was again changed to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, supposedly given by revelation of God, which we question, for the simple reason that we think the Lord gave it right in the first place in 1830. As a matter of fact, several of the earliest revelations to the church were given to the Church of Christ. We're confident the Lord was the speaker there, and that really should tell us something. The Book of Mormon verifies this name. After Christ had come to this continent and set up his church, it was called the Church of Christ. All this is good enough for us. We have with that name, sometimes in parentheses, the words temple lot, or otherwise it might say headquarters on the temple lot. And that keeps us from being confused with another larger Church of Christ found all over the country, having no connection with the Latter-day Saint faith. We have accepted the King James Authorized Version of the Bible and the Book of Mormon as our standard of faith, believing that all Latter-day revelations must harmonize with the Bible and the Book of Mormon. Or if the revelations do not harmonize, they're not the Word of God, and we make a point on this. We're told in a revelation through Joseph Smith that in the Bible and the Book of Mormon is the fullness of the gospel. We accept that literally. To us, a fullness means just that. And we understand by this that there will not be additional doctrine. Now, I said doctrine. I did not say revelation. There's a difference in those terms. The whole doctrine of Christ is in the New Testament of the Bible and the Book of Mormon. Now, I'm not discounting the Old Testament at all. It has its proper place. But you don't go there for the doctrine of Christ. The church was told in Revelation that I will establish my church like unto that which was taught by my disciples in days of old. Meaning, of course, the New Testament church. So it should be like that church, both in its doctrine and its organic form. Sad to say, there's been many changes from that scriptural pattern in the various Latter-day Saint churches. Again, the church was directed through Revelation to rely upon that which is written, meaning the Bible and the Book of Mormon, or in them it says, are all things written concerning my church, my gospel, and my rock. That covers everything. I want to be correctly understood. We believe in Latter-day Revelations, but they cannot disagree with the Bible and the Book of Mormon and still be the Word of God. We are confident there has been quite a little disagreement, and there will be no new doctrine. We published the Book of Commandments, which is the original publication of Revelations to the church through Joseph Smith. First published right here in Independence in 1833. That was 2 years before the Doctrine and Covenants came into existence. If one will compare the Revelations in the Book of Commandments with the same ones shown in the Doctrine and Covenants, he will see that many changes were made, and some of them rather drastic. Frankly, we are quite sure that God had nothing to do with changing of Revelations. Our concept of an unchangeable God, as we read of him in the Scriptures, will not permit us to believe that God would authorize the changing of existing revelations. Several of those changes have to do with the introduction into the church of a first presidency above the 12 apostles, and over the church also the office of high priest. So we do not accept either of those two offices as divine. We believe in the scriptural provision for apostles at the head of the church. The Apostle Paul tells us God has set in the church first apostles, and there are 12, not 15 as with the first presidency. Then he said secondarily prophets and so forth, and we believe in it that way. So it seems strange to us that some Latter-day Saint churches would effectually turn that around to say God has set in the church first a prophet and secondarily apostles. We think that's a serious error. We believe in modern prophecy, so there should be prophets in the church, but it's a spiritual gift. It's not an ordained office. Joseph Smith himself made the statement that a prophet is only a prophet when acting as such. That's true. When one has a spirit of prophecy from God, he's a prophet at that time. So far as the office of high priest is concerned, we feel that Jesus Christ was the great and the last high priest. The function of the high priest is given in the 5th and 8th chapters of Hebrews. He was to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins, which Christ did, of course. He made a perfect sacrifice for sins. There's no need of that office in the church on the earth after Christ's time. He's still our high priest. We have the high priesthood, which is the Melchizedek priesthood, and in a broad sense, anyone who holds the high priesthood is a high priest, whether he is an apostle or an evangelist or an elder. But I've been speaking of a specific ordained office of high priest we do not accept. We do not have patriarchs for the simple reason that there were none in the New Testament church. And again, this restored Church of Christ was to be just like that ancient church, both in its doctrine and its organic form. We have the Aaronic priesthood. From a doctrinal point of view, we cannot accept the doctrine and practice of polygamy, since the Book of Mormon tells us it's an abomination in the sight of God. We really cannot conceive of God calling something an abomination at one time and it not be an abomination at all times thereafter. So when this body heard that polygamy was being practiced at Salt Lake, we drew up a declaration of independence from them because of that. And there's where the separation came. We do not accept temple ordinances of baptism for the dead or of marriage for time and eternity with the sealing of families. We do not believe in many gods. By this I mean more than the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, or the idea that men may be exalted to become gods. So we cannot accept the Book of Abraham. We do not believe that the Heavenly Father was once a man as we are. I'm speaking of the Father, not the Son. That's belittling to the Heavenly Father. We do not believe in a Heavenly Mother. There's not a scratch in either the Bible or the Book of Mormon concerning such. And we're confident that these doctrines I speak of cannot be supported by the Bible and the Book of Mormon, in which is the fullness of the gospel of Christ, and therefore they're not the doctrine of Christ, and we want the doctrine of Christ. We accept the fundamental principles of the gospel, which are faith and repentance and baptism by immersion by one who is divinely called of God, the laying on of hands to bestow the gift of the Holy Ghost, the resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment. We have our sacrament services, which in our local congregations is the first Sunday of the month. We do use wine, as we're told in the Book of Mormon, and not water. Well, that's about it. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them for you.
I do have a couple of questions. You mentioned that your church believes in the Bible and the Book of Mormon. Then they don't believe in any type of Doctrine and Covenants or revelation that Joseph Smith had received while he was alive on the earth?
That's not so. But we believe that whatever is recorded in the way of revelation must conform to the Bible and the Book of Mormon. Or if it doesn't conform, then it's not a revelation from God. Now, certainly, he had nothing to do with changed revelations, which many of the earlier revelations, they were changed. And so if they're ever correct, they're correct as published in the Book of Commandments, rather than their changed form in the Doctrine and Covenants. So we really haven't taken a stand on each individual as revelation as to whether they're or not they're from God. We just leave it open as far as that.
So are you convinced then that some of the revelations that were received by Joseph Smith then are not from God?
That's right. Granville Hedrick took the position that he became a fallen prophet as of February of 1834. That was a revelation concerning Zion's camp coming back here to redeem the land of Zion. It was an utter failure. It was not a revelation of God. They were told in that revelation that the Lord would be with them and that angels would be in their midst. Well, under those circumstances, they could fail. Well, so that, we think, shows it was not a revelation of God.
Was Granville Hedrick part of that camp?
No, he didn't come into the church till 1843, just a year before Joseph Smith's death.
So he actually came into the church after your church believed that Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet?
Well, he's the one that took that position, and we've accepted that since that time. He got the, when they heard about polygamy in 1852, then they said, well, what's going on here? So then they started looking back to see and found other things that we could not agree with.
I see.
There's the Community of Christ Temple, and right across the street opposite of our visitor center is a remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're going to go in and see what we can learn about them. Here we are in Independence. This is the corner of Lexington and Liberty. W.W. Phelps' home used to be on the corner here. And this is where the printing office of the church was upstairs when his home was here. This is where, when the mobs came and destroyed the printing office, threw things out the windows, the copies of the Book of Commandments fell down on the ground, and the brave young Mary Elizabeth Rollins and her little sister grabbed copies of the Book of Commandments and ran into a cornfield nearby and hid while the mob walked past them trying to find them. That's the reason that the Book of Commandments was preserved, because these two young girls were brave enough to go grab the copies and hide in the cornfield till the mob was gone. Now today we have the Doctrine and Covenants because of that.